I think that's a reasonable expectation, which means multiple billions of dollars. It's important to put in context that we've been spoiled by the spot Bitcoin ETFs. We're like 10, $13 billion, whatever, that's easy. Actually, before those ETF launched, the fastest growing ETF of all time ever in the US in 30 years of ETFs gathered $5 billion in its first year. The Bitcoin ETFs have just spoiled us to get used to these absolutely massive numbers. So even if Ethereum ETFs gather $2 or $3 or $4 billion in their first year, they will be historical successes from the perspective of the ETF industry. Massive wins. And I think that's what we'll see. I do think these inflows set the stage for Ethereum to trade to a new all-time high. I think it could easily push ETH's price north of $5,000 if it's as successful as I suspect it will be. The reason for that is you have to remember that Ethereum has effectively no net new issuance, right? When you look at the amount of Ethereum being issued and then subtract the burn from use, even at these relatively low levels of use in the Ethereum ecosystem right now, we're more or less flat, which means that this demand shock is coming into the market and there's no native supply to soak it up.
Welcome back to our channel. Bitcoin ETF have made a monumental impact on the cryptocurrency market, marking one of the most successful ETF launches in history, pulling in around $13 billion in assets. These ETF have not only driven the price of Bitcoin higher, but have also fundamentally altered the way crypto is perceived in the United States. This success sets a high bar and provides a context for understanding the upcoming Ethereum ETF. While a smaller asset compared to Bitcoin and slightly more complex to understand, stands on the brink of a significant shift. Hougan predicts that Ethereum ETF, if they launch, could attract over $5 billion in their first year. This would be a transformative event for Ethereum, potentially pushing its price to new all-time highs and cementing its role as a vital platform for decentralized finance DeFi, non-fungible tokens NFTs, stablecoins, and other blockchain-based innovations.
The Bitcoin ETFs were by far and away the most successful ETF launch of all time. They've pulled in about $13 billion of assets. They've contributed to a rising price of Bitcoin. They've sort of changed the landscape of what crypto is in America. The ETH ETFs aren't going to be as big. Ethereum is, of course, a much smaller asset than Bitcoin and a little bit more complex to understand. But I still think they're going to be extremely important. I think these ETFs, assuming they launch, could easily pull in more than $5 billion in their first year on the market. I think that would reshape the Ethereum market. I think it would contribute to Ethereum moving to new all-time highs. And I also think the added regulatory clarity we get from having spot Ethereum ETFs in the market will help Ethereum continue to develop as an important new platform for DeFi, for NFTs, for stablecoins, and other assets. So this would be a game changer. It would move us into a new era of Ethereum. And I think the ETFs themselves would be very successful if they in fact launch. I think that's a reasonable expectation, which means multiple billions of dollars. It's important to put in context that we've been spoiled by the spot Bitcoin ETFs. We're like 10, $13 billion, whatever, that's easy. Actually, before those ETF launched, the fastest growing ETF of all time ever in the US in 30 years of ETFs gathered $5 billion in its first year. The Bitcoin ETFs have just spoiled us to get used to these absolutely massive numbers. So even if Ethereum ETFs gather $2 or $3 or $4 billion in their first year, they will be historical successes from the perspective of the ETF industry. Massive wins. And I think that's what we'll see. I do think these inflows set the stage for Ethereum to trade to a new all-time high. I think it could easily push ETH's price north of $5,000 if it's as successful as I suspect it will be. The reason for that is you have to remember that Ethereum has effectively no net new issuance, right? When you look at the amount of Ethereum being issued and then subtract the burn from use, even at these relatively low levels of use in the Ethereum ecosystem right now, we're more or less flat, which means that this demand shock is coming into the market and there's no native supply to soak it up. The example of the Ethereum futures ETFs, which were really a dud, they didn't attract much interest at all, is a good cautionary tale. And as you mentioned, that Twitter poll shows a lot of people are comfortable owning just Bitcoin. Those are the reasons why I don't think these will be as big as the Bitcoin ETFs, right? Which today holds something like $50 billion in assets. I think it will be substantially smaller than that. But even at a few $billion, I think that these will have a meaningful impact on the market. And I do believe there is that kind of interest because the investors that Bitwise talks to every day, and we do 20,000 meetings a year with professional investors, there's a substantial number of them that are interested in Ethereum. Now, I do think one little nuance, the Bitcoin ETFs boomed right out of the gate. I think the ETH ETFs could be a slower burn. I think there's more education around Ethereum, how it's different from Bitcoin, the value of diversification, the different use cases, than there is around the first ever crypto ETF. So even though I'm optimistic that we'll get $1 billion of flows, they might build over time and not have the same day one spike. But I do feel confident that there is demand for this asset. The Ethereum ecosystem is very interesting. It's going after different use cases than Bitcoin, and it's an attractive market. So ultimately, I think it'll pull in billions of dollars, but it could take longer than the Bitcoin ETF. Look, I think we're going to get there. I think we're in the ETF era of crypto, but there is a pretty big dividing line between Bitcoin and Ethereum and everything else, which is we had regulated futures contracts trading on a national futures exchange on the CME for Bitcoin and Ethereum. And that gives regulators a lot of confidence that the underlying market is not subject to market manipulation. We don't have that on Solana. So even if we get comfort around its security status, we still have a difference between Bitcoin and Ethereum that makes it more challenging. Ultimately, I think we're going to get spot ETFs on a wide array of crypto assets. I think that can happen over the next couple of years. But my guess is what we're going to see first is something like comprehensive crypto legislation that elevates exchanges like Coinbase to a new level of regulatory oversight that gives the SEC comfort that all of these assets that are trading are ETF eligible. So I don't know that we're going to continue to get this one or two ETF approach. I think we may, work with these for a while, see some legislative developments, and then get a lot of ETFs. But we're closer today than we were, last week. I do think this is an important step, but I wouldn't extend the line to Solana too easily. There's some additional work that has to go on before we talk about that. I think of those four, programmable money speaks the most to me. I find that the best way to describe ETH is, even though it's not a perfect analogy, to point to something like Apple's App Store and say it's a global decentralized computer that you can build applications on top of. And some of these applications are real killer apps. Things like stablecoins, things like DeFi, things like NFTs, things like tokenization. All of those only exist because the Ethereum ecosystem is able to support them. And I think that idea of this platform that killer applications exist on top of that are reinventing finance, I think that's the narrative that works. Every product wrapper comes with its own risks. If you hold ETH directly, maybe through a centralized exchange, and you stake it, you're taking on security risk in exchange for that extra yield that you get from staking it. If you hold it directly in a self-sovereign format and staking it, you're taking on personal security hygiene risks and other risks to do that, and it's inconvenient. The ETF will be, assuming it launches, extremely convenient. You'll be able to buy it in your brokerage account. It will be extremely low cost, but you'll be forfeiting this yield. Does that mean it's right for everyone? Absolutely not. If you're deeply crypto native and you're comfortable in these other ecosystems, you should do it yourself because you can access that yield. But there are many investors who don't feel comfortable doing it themselves, and for them, the ETF will be a good choice. But it's you're absolutely right. It makes the ETF less attractive than holding ETH yourself and staking it if you're comfortable taking on those risks.
Often mentioned alongside Bitcoin and Ethereum, reflects the market's desire for diversified crypto investments. While an ETF for Solana would face regulatory hurdles, the demand is evident. As the third major asset in the crypto discussion, Solana's potential ETF could further expand the crypto investment landscape, although it may take time to materialize. The process of making assets liquid and tradable on blockchain platforms represents a long-term vision for crypto. While immediate applications like stablecoins and DeFi have millions of users, broader tokenization efforts, such as trading traditional funds on Ethereum, may be years away. This highlights the ongoing evolution and future potential of blockchain technology.
I think there are two factors. I think one is that people like Solana and are excited about it and think it's a compelling investment thesis. So it would be nice to have an ETF on it. And the other is that people are pushing for regulated futures on Solana. At least that's a sort of thought bubble out there. But mostly I think it's that people want it. It's the third big asset, right, that people talk about when they talk about the most interesting assets in crypto. They go Bitcoin, Ethereum, and then Solana. So I think it's an expression of desire rather than reason. But look, we're going to get there eventually. An ETF would work in Solana if it were allowed to launch, and it would lower costs and raise security. I think we will get there, but I do think it'll take a little bit of time. The issue is the public's conception of tokenization is really around taking things like funds and stocks and having them trade on Ethereum rather than on existing national platforms. That's sort of the modern general consensus. And my view is that is many years away. If we talk about tokenization of the idea of taking anything and making it liquid, taking dollars and making it liquid, then I think that's a valid narrative. But I worry that when you say tokenization, what people think of is BlackRock's money market fund. And I just think that that's probably a next cycle mainstream event. And in the meantime, there are real killer apps today, again, stablecoins, DeFi, NFTs, etc., that have millions of users today. And so that's why I worry a little bit about leaning too much into tokenization, because I think it's still, years off from a mainstream perspective. I do think it's a breakthrough moment. I think what happened last week in the US, we had this event around the spot ETH ETF. We had the US Congress pass the first ever piece of pro-crypto legislation repealing an accounting rule from the SEC called SAB 121. We had the US House in a bipartisan fashion, both political parties voting to support comprehensive crypto legislation. That's a complete 180 from where we were even 2 weeks ago, when the executive branch under President Biden was threatening to veto the first piece of pro-crypto legislation. All of a sudden, crypto has become sort of the only thing that there is a bipartisan consensus on in America. And I really think it is a complete sea change. The industry has been marching forward with both of its hands tied behind its back by this lack of regulatory clarity and what has been a broad-based regulatory assault on crypto over the last 4 years. And it appears that assault is over, and we're shifting to having a tailwind. And I really think it's hard to overstate the importance of this change. I think it's night and day. I think it's a 180. I think it's going to unleash the mainstream applications of crypto. And I think last week was probably the most important week in crypto in the last 10 years. Maybe 9 years, maybe since the Ethereum's launch.
Recent legislative developments in the US mark a turning point for the crypto industry. The passage of pro-crypto legislation and bipartisan support in Congress signal a significant shift from the regulatory challenges of the past. This newfound clarity and support could unleash mainstream crypto applications, making recent weeks some of the most crucial in crypto history. Please like and subscribe my channel.